All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending what part of the world you are joining us from. My name is Alex Faust, your host of Conversations at the Edge, and very excited to welcome back Re Perez, who is a former Fortune 500 brand consultant turned entrepreneur, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and CEO of Branding for the People, which is a strategic branding agency that helps entrepreneurs build best-in-class brands. He's the author of the best-selling book, Your Brand Should Be Gay, Even If You're Not, The Art and Science of Creating an Authentic Brand. And today, Re is joining us to talk about his brand new learning suite called How to Build a World-Class Brand to Command Premium Pricing. So, Re, welcome back to Conversations at the Edge. And where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from Austin. It's good to be with you again, Alex.
Very nice. Austin used to be my hometown. Now I have traveled north to a less hot, summery spot.
Jealous. But
Yeah.
But Austin's still a great city.
Yes, we'll be back in October. So waiting for the weather to cool down a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, for those who are joining live, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. The last 10 minutes are for you. But I want to jump in, Re, and ask you, in your course, the new course with Growth Institute, you've defined brand as being a desired perception. And I'm curious, what do you mean by brand is a desired perception, and how do you create a desired perception?
Yeah, so the thought process here is, I always like to say you don't own your brand, it resides in people's minds. And so everything from how you look, what you say, how you say things, all create a perception in people's minds. And the reality is people create perceptions of each other all the time, whether it's people or businesses. And the thought process here is, well, what's the desired perception that you want to create for your business? Or if you're building a personal brand, what's the desired perception that you want to make sure that people know exactly who you are and who you're not, and build a brand around that, because then ostensibly that desired perception is going to attract the customers, the clients that you desire to attract, and then ultimately impact your business. So the sum of all that is you want to create, so what you do for a business, let's say you make shoes, you sell tires, you provide services, there's what you do for a business, then your brand, the perception, is the layer on top of what you actually do that makes it easier for your customers to buy from you, to resonate with you, to want to learn more about what you have to sell, right? And it's that, so we deal in the realm of perception and being able to influence that perception so you can get the business results that you're looking to get.
So let's talk a little bit more about the difference between what a company does or what a company sells and what the brand is.
Yeah. So there's some classic examples I like to give, and in my learning suite, I talk about this, I think, but sort of like, Starbucks doesn't sell coffee, right? They sell more than coffee. In fact, they're creating an experience. Their positioning used to be around, what was it, third place, right? It was like there's home, there's work, and then there's Starbucks, right? And so that positioning was around being able to create a place where people go to, and there's a Starbucks everywhere. Nike is, they don't just sell apparel and shoes, they are about winning. This idea of achievement and winning. So Nike helps me win. So perceptually, they are creating a brand that Nike helps me win. That's very different than says Nike sells me shoes, right? So it is that layer. Think what's one of your favorite brands, Alex, that maybe the people would know.
That people would know. I really am a big fan of my Peloton.
Your Peloton, okay. Oh, so actually, that's a good point. I haven't really studied the Peloton brand. I do know the Peloton brand, and then even with their, ups and downs with their publicity challenges that they've had, but I'm pretty sure they sell more than a stationary bike, right? They're probably selling some version of maybe some version of like what Nike is doing in terms of like performance or achievement or, you know, fitness, you know, lifestyle, but also community, right? I'm not a Peloton user, so I'm kind
Certainly
of
the community. I love the community. I'm like, I'm very into it.
yeah. So if you're really into it, like I've done spin class, I've done Peloton, but if you're really into it, what I do know about Peloton, it's very big on community. And so they're selling community. And then probably underneath that, they're also selling quality instructors. They're selling, you know, a quality product, maybe best customer service, all those layers underneath that. But it's the overarching promise or the brand or the perception that you want to own, and that gets expressed in many different ways. So you still have to have a good product or service as a business, but your brand is what gets them to the doorstep, that gets them to walk into your home, right? So using that analogy, it's like no one wants to go into a house if they don't want to go into that house, if it doesn't have the right perception. But if the house looks inviting and warm and you know, whatnot, then I'm more likely going to go to the doorstep and want to like knock on the door and be like, what do we have inside this house, right? Does that make sense?
So,
Yeah.
yeah, and you mentioned in the beginning, you know, that you like to say that a business doesn't necessarily own the brand. It's the market that's kind of like create or gets to decide what the brand is. So,
Well, there's a kicker there. That is
okay, go ahead.
that's not exactly how I would language it. But so let me bring in another distinction here. This is important.
Yeah, please.
So oftentimes, so I'm a brander. So, and I know a lot of marketers. So oftentimes you can build a business and a brand through great marketing without actually first defining your brand. And you're like, well, let me spend all this money in advertising and, you know, whatever, all this marketing activity. And then by default, based on how the market responds, that becomes our brand. So it's brand by default. If I'm being a purist on the branding side of things, branding is about sort of putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is who we are as a business, as a company, and then going to market with your proposition. And, you know, obviously there's a little bit of back end research in terms of what is the customer, what's the problem we're trying to solve. But sometimes brands are built and solving a problem that the customer didn't know that they were trying to solve. And so that's where some of the most innovative brands come in. You're like, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is the hole in the market that we're filling. And then now let's bring this to market. And so now you're building a brand with strategic intent versus a brand by default. Now, in today's marketplace, I think there is a convergence of those two lines of thinking, because sure, you can put a stake in the ground and saying, this is who we are, but if no one buys it, it doesn't matter. So there it's like, well, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is the products and services that we're creating. Now let's iterate based on that, how the market is responding to this and what's important to them. And then you create an even better product. So it's just a different purview on how to approach growing a business through branding.
So imagine, you know, you're a business, you haven't thought much about branding. You've got this kind of brand by default, and you're thinking, okay, it's time for me to start investing in branding. Do you first go to what is my brand by default and try and like amplify that? Or do you say, actually, I want to create this other persona that might not match what the market's already seeing? How do you advise your clients on like that kind of decision?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So there's probably this has one big assumption, right? That a business has been in existence for at least a few years, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very different than some startup brands, some startup businesses where they're just trying to get proof of concept. They're trying to figure out if what they're selling actually will resonate. But for a lot of the clients that we work with that are a bit more established, or at least 3 or 4 or 5 years in, yes, having those data points from customers is critical and key to helping to fine tune, evolve, or transform a brand. But that's just one data set. So there's a chart that I like to use and think of like a Venn diagram. But the first sphere of the Venn diagram, it's got to be a brand that is credible. And then the second part is it's got to be relevant to your target audiences. And then the third sphere in the Venn diagram is unique or differentiating. And so credible, relevant, and unique, the intersection of that is where you want to best position your brand. And so to answer your question, I'll bring this home to the point here, is that yes, you want to understand what's relevant to your target audiences and your customers, your existing customers. And then also you can even extend that to prospects. Like, what is important to them? What do they care about? But that only fulfills one of the spheres of a 3-sphere Venn diagram. The other part has got to be something that you can credibly own. So if what's important to your customers is X and you are not good at that and you can't deliver on making quality shoes or a quality bike, if you can't credibly own that, then all right, well, that's a disservice, right? Or that's not the best place to position your brand. And then the third thing is unique. So this is where you look at the competitive landscape. So there's a whole data set that you want to look at, which is, all right, well, who else is solving the same problem for our customers who have the same exact concerns, and how do they differentiate themselves in the marketplace? You know, what's their unique selling proposition? You know, what do they seem to edge on? You know, Apple probably leans more into design and minimalism than PC, right? So, and it's the intersection of all three of those. So it is important when we're working with those clients is to kind of look at that data set, but it's 1/3 of the data set that you should be looking at.
Thank you. So,
Yeah.
you know, your class is about premium branding, being able to command premium pricing for the products and services that you're delivering. And I'm curious, what makes a brand premium? Like, what are the characteristics that would separate like a Lululemon from an Old Navy if you're looking for a pair of leggings?
Yeah. So on the broadest sense, I would say when I think of premium brands, I think that of brands that are not competing they're not commodity, they're not competing on price. That's my plain sort of English way to approach this. So if you're not competing on price, what are you competing on? You're competing on value, and that value can look different things, right? Let's go back to the Peloton, the value of being plugged into a community. How do you put a price tag to that? So it's almost worth spending a little bit more as opposed to just looking for the cheapest bike, because that value of that community is far transcends getting a bike that's cheaper, or getting a bike that's cheaper and you actually don't even use it, versus having a bike that you absolutely love because it's great community. That value could come in terms of other things, like Nordstrom has a refund policy that I guess you can return anything at any time at Nordstrom, right? So the customer service, that's a value to the Nordstrom brand. Some brands might have this is actually kind of recent. I came across this. Have you ever had one of those Cutco knives? Those
Great
Cutco
scissors.
Yes,
great scissors.
Great scissors. So basically they have this whole thing where it's like free sharpening. You just, as long as you ship it to them, they can so that's an ad. They didn't have to do that. I'm sure people can just buy sharpeners, but they pride themselves on having these really sharp knives. So what do? They added that in, they added value into their brand by making it easier for you to get them sharpened and have that same level of quality in your knife. So every brand is different, but it is that's the short version, is basically creating value and competing on value rather than price.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another one of the pillars that you talk about in your course is that a great brand tells a story. And I can sure there's like a lot of consumer brands. We've been talking about a lot of consumer brands that have great stories, but when we look into like the B2B space or some like less exciting industries, telling that story is a little bit more difficult. So how do you help your clients come up with a story for maybe like a commercial cleaning business that isn't necessarily selling something that people are, dying to have every day?
Well, okay, that's an interesting thing because I actually did brand a corporate cleaning company.
Oh, perfect.
And so so I can draw upon reference on that. But how do you reconcile telling your story? I think whether you're a B2B, B2C, a personal brand, whatever that is, I do believe that story, your brand story, is important across the board. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to tell a story that is about, so I'm going to use a broad example of a luxury brand. They're selling coolness, they're selling status, they're selling, image, things that are very emotionally charged, but not necessarily life-saving, right? And in a B2B context, because I have a lot of clients that are in the B2B realm, you're not selling sex, you're not selling, necessarily status or image or, coolness, but you are selling some form of emotion or intangibility, and it might be centered around trust or impact. A lot of big brands, as part of their story, goes back to their story centered around their impact in the communities that they operate in, or their ability to, convert plastic that they've collected in oceans and turn them into a product that helps tell the stories or provide job opportunities, or provides opportunities for people who otherwise wouldn't have opportunities. That's the story that people linger into. And so the story, whether it's very, selling sex or selling status or image, to selling a connection or selling the idea that they're really part of helping to save the environment, or they're helping to usher forward a movement, that still is compelling. And so the real question here is, whether you're B2B or B2C, is what is your brand? What's the movement of your brand? And then tell your story from that perspective. Now, some brands may not be so lofty of like, oh, we're looking to eradicate X in the world. That's okay. You can cull it down and tell your story. And for a lot of founders, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs as well, oftentimes their story of how they've overcome this adversity, or that they've transformed their health, or they've, eliminated sometimes their story becomes the key selling point for their products, programs, books, or services. So it's applicable for everyone. And we're human beings. At the end of the day, Alex, we're all human beings. And so we love telling stories. We love learning through stories. We love connecting through stories. So big advocate for the storytelling.
Thank you. And a reminder for the folks who are here live, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. I'll put them at the top of the queue for Re. So another one of the pillars to having a great brand is evoking an emotional promise, is what you have in your course. I'm curious, what is an emotional promise, and how does a brand create that for clientele?
Yeah, so it's sort of layering on the things that I've already said there. So like I think I might have used in the course Harley Davidson, right? Their emotional brand promise is freedom on the open road. So their business is motorcycles, but their brand promise is freedom on the open road. So you ask yourself the question of like, does this evoke an emotion? Can you visualize freedom on the road? Is there like a feeling that gets triggered or awakened, if you will, when you have a promise that stirs something up in someone else? And it's not just to evoke an emotion for the sake of evoking emotion. It's about creating an emotion on how you want your brand to be associated with, how you want your brand to be remembered, and what's the benefit, the emotional benefit that people get from using your products or buying your services. That's above and beyond. So every brand wants to own the emotion trust, like a brand that you can trust. All right, well, that's level one. Like ostensibly every brand should build a brand that conveys trust. But how do you get your customers to buy trust or to earn your trust? Is it through creating an amazing user experience when they come to your website? Do they give you some money back guarantees? Do they make it easier for you to return their products and services if you're not happy with it? Let's say I'm speaking to some e-commerce brands where you're buying stuff online, or in a B2B context, do the people that you're hiring, do they have the credentials and the experience to help provide a consulting service, right? So these are all things and factors that build trust. And so the emotional brand promise that you're asking about is, what is the thing that sits on top of all of those things that becomes the leading edge of what your brand stands for?
What is it for?
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious for branding for the people. How would you explain like the emotional brand promise that you guys are portraying?
So great question. So I'm a big advocate of practicing what I preach. So I have a branding agency, as you know, and so people come to us because they want a best-in-class brand. But our brand promise is we transform the brands that transform the world. And there's actually imbued in that brand promise is a near-term benefit and an end benefit. So meaning our clients come to us, like I said, usually clients that work with us have an existing brand and they want to next level it. So oftentimes we transform their brand so that's this amazing brand. But the reason we're doing that is so that they can actually go out and have a bigger impact, i.e. transform the communities, the people, the audiences that they're impacting. So our impact in transforming the world is through the brands that we're rebranding. Does that make sense?
Yes. I don't know that we've thought it out so much, but like that's also kind of the impact that Growth Institute is after. We're trying to help scale the impact of the businesses that we're impacting.
Yeah. So you get it. So it is. So, every business is different. Every brand is different. It's kind of like, what can you own? What is something that's going to be unique in your category? And then what is something that is relevant to your target audiences? It all goes back to that Venn diagram for me that really becomes a good filter and a lens on how to approach your branding, as opposed to just pretty colors and pretty logos. It's so much more than that.
Yeah. So one of the most important things, if I'm understanding correctly, is also the authenticity of your brand. You can't just have words on your website that don't mean anything when it comes to actually working with you. Do you have a way of measuring like brand authenticity and how it's perceived out in the world? Because I don't think, at least not the leaders who are in our community, are thinking that they have an inauthentic brand, but I wonder if there's a way to measure that in terms of how their customers feel about the brand.
Yeah, so I'm not a research firm, and I know that there's probably research firms that could probably deconstruct this thing, authenticity, and look at how would we measure authenticity. for me, I try to keep things relatively simple, but if I were to give a framework on how we would measure authenticity, I'd be looking at what are the indicators of authenticity, right? Having a clear vision, having alignment of that vision between the C-suite and your employees and the culture, doing, delivering on what you said you promised. So if you're promising X and you don't deliver on that, that's a lack of authenticity. Also, is the from a design aesthetic, is the look and feel, is it resonant to, does it represent your core values? Does it represent your brand personality? And if it doesn't, then it's a lack of authenticity. So there's many different layers depending on which one you choose to identify as your top indicators of authenticity, but those are the top ones for me. You know, vision, your values, alignment with your personality, alignment between what you say and what you actually do, and what you promise and what you actually deliver.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're
so
welcome.
My last question for you, we've got about 3 minutes left, is how can we tell if we have a strong or a weak brand versus just maybe like a good or a bad sales process?
This one is a little tricky because you could have a great brand, generate great leads, and if you have a crappy sales system and don't have good salespeople, then is that the brand's fault or is that the salesperson's fault, right? You know, one way, and this is largely qualitative, which is to the degree that the person comes to the sales call having some inherent trust or openness or desire or intent to actually buy from a brand, then branding has done its job in really basically creating the right perception. Going back to your original question, it's created the desired perception that just gets the person to come to the table to consider buying from you or not. And so that I think we can take credit for, but I think we'd have to draw the line between the conversion of that with your sales team or your customer service. So let's just say you're selling products online. You have great ads on Instagram or Facebook. You drive all this traffic to a website because someone sees an ad and they're like, I need to buy that. And then you make it so difficult for them to actually buy. Nothing works on the website. It's hard to put your credit card information. It's not secure. All these different things. It's like, is that the brand's fault? I mean, in a way it is, because that's your whole brand experience. But you know, that's a sales or technical issue. But if you're selling a service-based business and you create this great brand, and then someone shows up to the call and your salesperson is not good at identifying the person's needs, wants, desires, the implications of their issues, like the whole sales process, then that's a sales problem. So anyway, I'd say, to me, a strong brand is one that is authentic, and a one that is creating value in the marketplace. It's like it's solving people's problems, and that it's actually delivering and creating a relationship with their customers or clients such that not only do they want to buy from them once, but they'll buy from them again. They'll tell all their friends. And if they don't tell all friends, they will tell all their friends. Whether or not they buy again, they'll become a raving, loyal brand advocate. That's what makes a strong brand.
Great. Well, Re, thank you so much for joining us at Conversations at the Edge again.
Yeah.
And to the community, if you want to learn more, we have Re's new learning suite available inside the Edge, and obviously go buy his book. And look forward to seeing you all again next week. And Re, thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Alex. All right. Thanks.